Good morning. Mm, Depending on where you are. Good day. I'm just going to drop into a little meditation for a few minutes while people slide in. Like great silence at the beginning. Welcome to the beginning. Great silence always filtering up into your meditation, into your life. It's good if you can not be too picky about how it shows up. Happy Sunday. Mm, Welcome. We've got no dearth of teachers this morning to ruin the Dharma for you. Allison Atwill, and Michelle Riddle, and Tess Beasley, and myself. And there might be others here too that I can't see. I'm on my cell phone, so I only get a few little squares. And I'm coming to you live from Volcanoes National Park on the Big Island of Hawaii. And yeah, so if you, I don't know if you, pretty bright behind me, but hapu'u ferns and all kinds of ohia trees and all kinds of incredible um, incredible creatures out here. And you probably can't hear it, but maybe you can hear it. There's birds and roosters and the occasional dog bark. And if I look up into the trees, the ohia trees, there's the lehua blossom, which is this incredible bright red. It's like an explosion of red light frozen in time. Important flower in the Hawaiian culture. And what I'm doing here is coming home. This is where I was born and raised. I was raised on a different side of the island, but um, coming back to see if this might be a place that we would like to live. And coming home for me is a fraught thing, like I imagine it is for lots of other people too. This is kind of, I realized at some point, I thought my experience was really special, what was happening with me coming home this time. And then I realized, oh, this is just this archetypal thing about you leave home, you start a life somewhere else, and then you come back home, and then you realize what you hadn't seen about home in the first place. Like I just driving along the highway and seeing Mauna Loa, great, great, huge mountain that just erupted for a little bit and then settled back down just a couple weeks ago, and seeing Mauna Kea, great, like by a certain kind of measurement, the tallest mountain in the world if you measure from the seafloor. But little, the observatories on top and snow and mountains that I saw every day for 23 years. And there's an interesting clash between that. The mountains come out of the silence, and the ferns, the hapu'u ferns, and the ohia lehua blossom, and the cock's crow all comes out of the silence to meet me. And then I step off the plane, and I've got so much baggage, so much baggage about this place and my life that was here, and and a lot of it has to do with a sense of belonging and whether or not I feel at home. And I think that's sort of the direction we're going to go in today. Some of what we're going to do, and interesting how many of my ideas about this island and its places and its people desperately need updating because I haven't lived here in at least 15 years, and much of the world is rapidly developing, but it's really, you can notice it really acutely in such a small place. You can drive around the entire island in 4 or 5 hours. So, and huge swaths of it are uninhabited too. So the places that are developing a lot of times develop inward rather than outward. So lots of changes. Um, and so I'm really surprised by when I grew up here, there was some significant sense of racial tension between Native Hawaiians and um, and the Howleys. Um, the Howleys, like, lots of different ways to translate the word, but it more or less means foreigner and is sort of explicitly used primarily for white people. So that growing up, there was always some sense that I didn't belong here, I think. And this was somebody else's land that I was squatting on. And interesting to notice, I don't know how much I actually even got that from the outside. As I come back here, I realize, my gosh, like, people are so incredibly friendly and welcoming. That's really been my entire experience here. But I carry this incredible sense of not belonging with me back here. And I've had a few little experiences where that has cracked, like where the sort of allowed the, I don't know if I'd allowed the great silence, but it just sort of busted out. And some of it is, I mean, just seeing the mountains and the forest is the silence just bursts through that. And for a moment or two or three, I forget that there is a me that either belongs or doesn't belong. Um, as Michelle was saying that earlier today about that, even if you feel like you belong with Allison, but immediately the mind comes up with, oh, even if you feel like you belong, then not belonging arises with that too. So when the silence is there, there is neither belonging nor not belonging. There's no one to belong or not to belong. So anyway, we um we went to a little beach park a few days ago, and with my wife and our 2.5-year-old and I, and we were enjoying the beach park. And there's this, pointy, what they call lava. There's pahoehoe, which is a nice smooth lava, and then the lava. And the joke is that, like, they call it because that's what it feels like when you step on it, like that. So I was being incredibly careful with him. He got his little shoes on, and I was walking around the lava. And then we're walking back to the car, and this minivan drives up, and all these little kids start pouring out, like 5 or 6 of them, like local kids. And immediately that sense of not belonging came up in me. Oh, these are the people who actually live here. These are the people who belong here. I can tell by the color of their skin and the shape of their face. The little each one was wearing the same T-shirt from the school that they go to. Almost like I could tell they belonged. They belonged to a club that I was not a part of. Everything about them sort of. My son doesn't know that. He just goes, "Kids!" And he runs up. It's like all he cares about. He's so social, and he runs up, and the kids were a little bit like, "Whoa," because he's kind of, you say he's aggressively friendly. But then, I don't know, within a minute, they were all just running around together. They had completely included him into their group, running around together, and it's like these are kids, some sort of Hawaiian ancestry because they have like a natural deep tan. And then here's our son who's got like rosy red cheeks, blonde hair, and it's such a stark contrast visually. But there didn't seem to be any separation within the group as they were running around. And before you know it, they're all down by the water, throwing rocks in the water. And then my son takes off his shoes and his socks, and he starts stepping into the water. And the other kids kind of look at each other and look at him. and then they start taking off their shoes and stepping in the water. It's this great thing, and he shows this incredible confidence that I sort of hadn't allowed him to have when I was walking him around together. This incredible thing about just silence emerges in a situation like that, and at a couple of transition points like that where I feel like, oh, the not belonging that I'm feeling right now might just be in my own heart, mostly in my own heart. No doubt there are people on this island who would vehemently agree that I do not belong here. That's a real thing, you know. Um, that is a real thing, and I have had experiences in the past of people deciding rather violently that I don't belong here. And so there is that. It's not that other people don't agree with that assessment. Um, but I don't know. As I sit here in the forest and I look around, I don't see any evidence of that. The hapu'u ferns reach out and welcome me with the sound of my son's voice. My son, oh, okay, buddy, have fun.
Bye.
Bye.
I got my water.
So that, right there,
I got my water.
you got your water? Good. So I mean, it's like there, right? Who doesn't belong here? There's no belonging. There's no not belonging. There's, it's like that. It's um, just incredible in that way. And one more thing to say, and then I'll pass it on, is so we got here and we didn't know, like, we've been living in Washington State. It's a beautiful place. And we came out here just to see. I don't know, do we want to live out here? And I didn't have a conclusion at all about whether I wanted to live here or not. And then we found a house, and then we put an offer on it. And it was just like this. I mean, we looked at a few houses, but this one, in a way that the draw of the house came up out of the silence. And we had all sorts of, there's this other house and it has more space in this way and it has this and that. I'd be able to set up my drums there, but this other house, it just came out of the silence. And we both felt it in our hearts that, this is the one, despite all of our considerations that there might not be enough space or this or that. Some screws missing from the roof. So then it seemed settled. Okay. I texted everyone, we're moving to Hawaii. We made an offer. They accepted it. We're in the inspection period. And we're planning, like, what kind of fruit trees we might want to plant, what we're going to do with the grass, and where we're going to put what. We're taking measurements. And then we went to spend a night in a little town called Pahoa, which is down on the coast, farther down, closer. It extends all the way down to the ocean. And I'd never really spent any time in Pahoa, primarily because where I grew up, it had a reputation for being like kind of a lot of crazy people and a lot of drugs and a lot of crime. And so I was like, I went down there. It's absolutely gorgeous, and certainly a lot of interesting, very strange people. A lot of old throwback hippies and neo hippies, and after being there for 12 hours, we decided, no, wait, not volcano, this is home. So you can see how quick we've got to cancel the house in volcano. We got to find one in Pahoa. That's the place where we need to be. And this is the reason that the mind starts coming up with all of these. I know. So before I even got here, I thought, Washington's really nice. I like it here. I don't even know if I want to live in Hawaii. And then we get to Hawaii. Hawaii is really nice. I don't want to live anywhere else than volcano. And then, Pahoa is really great. I want to live. Who knows how the mind does all these, comes to conclusions and starts to build a case for why I am now home and this is the only place. And that's what we were talking about that right before this, that there is a true thing there about a sense of place and how it connects with the psyche and soul and heart, but also the silence arises out of all of that, right? And the silence that arises in volcano is a different silence in a way, or it takes a different form than it does down in Pahoa. It takes a different form than it does in the Wenatchee Valley in Washington. So it's that incredible thing about the form and emptiness thing about um, red roof, green roof, white house, greenhouse, river, lake, ocean, Hawaiian, Howley, whatever it is. The silence speaks through all of it. So that's my story about belonging and coming home. And I think I'll pass it on to Tess, I think, right? Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Jesse. It's nice to hear the birds and the kid sort of both calling from their trees in the background. And it sort of feels like reminded of John Tarrant telling stories of his daughter crawling into his lap during Teishos and the Teisho just sort of continuing with the Dharma. I don't know. Somehow it's everywhere. I guess I want to talk a little bit about the other side of, I love what you say, that home is always then the place I'm arriving. Oh, that not, I feel like that a little bit when I travel, when I think I could live here. I could live here. This is so much, this is better than where I live because this is, and usually lasts for 2 or 3 days. And then I think, nah, I kind of like where I live too. But I guess I want to talk a little bit about the other side of that, which is nowhere is home, including maybe even my own being sometimes doesn't feel like home. Something I have to get away from, or it's something I'm trying to reach. And that in some way that there's the definition of suffering, or there's a tremendous amount of suffering that comes from this isn't the right place, or these aren't the right people, or it's not the right temperature, or I'm not the right person. For somehow the world is not the right world that I'm living in. Somehow my home has been disrupted, or somewhere else. And this came to mind in a very vivid way recently for me, as I've been thinking about this great silence. And some way, the great silence is it's before any of those divisions have come into existence here and there. Any kind of ranking, any kind of differentiation, really. That everything somehow belongs, and everything is welcome to take its place in existence, and everything is welcome to leave its place in existence, and everything just keeps moving. And then somehow ideas start entering the picture and things get tricky. And so I was listening. I met someone recently who's an incredibly smart, creative, interesting person. And I started talking with her, and she was saying to me how lonely her life has felt, how much that force has been active in her life. And the more I started talking to her, one of the things she said with incredible certainty was that she's very sure that she's a star being from somewhere out there, and that she's very limited being in a body, and that she can't wait until the moment that she can return to her real home and her real place in existence and her real capacity. And that in fact, the reality is this sort of video game, and that you're stuck and it's fixed and it's not real, and that the real life is out there. And I was listening to her, and it's easy to just think like, oh, you think you're a star being, okay. But I thought, it's so easy. Everyone has a version of that. I know a version of that in myself, which is there's a reason somehow that I feel outside of things, or lonely, or like I haven't quite had the right life, or I've done something wrong. And there's something, as I was noticing, as I was talking to her, there's this interesting consoling effect that it has on that part of the psyche, that maybe it's not my fault somehow, that maybe I'm just ended up in the wrong place or the wrong body. And that I guess the other implicit assumption is, well, then something can be done about it. If I just find the right body, the right place, the right, I don't know, outfit, the right haircut, the right something, the right way of speaking, that somehow I'll feel like my real self, or my life will make sense, or I'll be home. And I guess in some way that's kind of the self, is that there's an explanation that I can keep going. It somehow keeps me outside of whatever's here. And there can be a consolation in that, but ultimately it's quite painful because we think it's true. And then we start creating all sorts of reasons and rules and longings that prevent what I was noticing in being with this person, especially, is that the offers for real connection or intimacy that do appear in a conversation, there's already an immediate, no, you don't get it. This is who I really am. You don't understand. And so there's a word that kept coming to mind as we were thinking about this territory is there are ways we keep exiling ourselves from our lives. And it can be through sort of like what Jesse said, that I think somehow I don't belong in this place. But I was noticing recently I got invited to a cocktail party. And in my mind, the people attending it, and especially as I entered the situation, these are not my kind of people, started entering. And I don't know, I could feel myself starting to just resist the situation and make reasons and make judgments. And then I sat down by the fire. I started to just, roll with it a little bit and see what happened. And a woman asked me, well, what do you do? And I started kind of saying a little bit. And she said, oh, well, in fact, my little girl, who was 11, she said, come here to the little girl, offers me guided meditations every night. And I started asking the little girl, well, how do you know when you're going to say something? How do you know where it comes from? And she says, well, I just get really quiet inside and I see what would feel good for me to be here. And then I just say that to my mom. And every night they do this. And I thought, wow, I really have no idea who's here or what's happening. And whatever idea I might have or story I might have about the kind of people I'm with, I don't know. But this kind of exiling can happen not only in the exterior world, where maybe, I'm not a real writer. Those are real writers. Or I'm not a real artist. Those are real artists. Or I've often heard people say of this particular gathering, everyone else seems to be understanding and knowing, the kind of light or awakening or happiness or something. And I can tell they get it and I don't. And that already is a kind of exiling out of the situation or out of my own experience. And there also seems to be this kind of reciprocal relationship where, to the extent I'm willing to just inhabit really what's here, the emotion that's here, the sensation that's here, the whatever is appearing, I'm really willing to inhabit it, not either exile it or exile myself. That home kind of appears. And almost like someone showed me an image not so long ago about how snails carry their home on their back. It's like we actually carry our home with us in every place we go and we don't cut it off. And it's funny how actually fungible reality is when we're not making rules about it. I had kind of a funny experience this week where I was having to be in New York City for a meeting, and it was my turn to lead the open temple. And I thought, well, no problem, I'll just lead it from the hotel room. But then my partner said, well, I have a call that morning also. It happens to be at the same time, and it's a very small hotel room. And I thought, well, how, immediately, well, wait, that's not fair. And how will it be quiet enough? And where will I go? And this won't be, as Jesse was saying, this will not be the right place for this kind of thing to happen. And I thought, well, hang on a second, let me just explore. And I went into this little bathroom, had a nice little marble background, and I found a little table and made myself a little cushion. I had a perfect size little, actually quite little attractive little wooden trash can. I had my little bell, and within 3 minutes flat, I had a temple, And there was something about being willing to, there's a koan that says, someone's walking with the world honored one, the Buddha, and Buddha says, this would be a nice spot to build a temple, to build a sanctuary. And his companion takes a blade of grass and puts it in the ground and says, there, the sanctuary is built. And it's that same kind of feeling that here can be a perfect place for a temple. And wherever it is, and here can be the perfect place for home, if I can somehow really inhabit it. I guess one other thing to say about that, and maybe we'll sit for a bit, is there's also a way in which one of the ways I was imagining this is almost like we have different rooms in our own being. And some of them we take up frequent residence in and and maybe don't want to leave. And others we may try to wall off or keep closed, or almost like in fairy tales where you have the forbidden room that you don't dare to go and you definitely don't want anyone else to go. And there's some way in which, at least I notice for myself, to the extent that I'm willing to have rooms open and energy flow through whatever those caverns of my being are, whether they're fears, whether they're sensations, whether they're habits, whether they're, when things are included, I actually do feel most at home because I don't have to be afraid of things jumping out at me or dragging me down to the basement somewhere, or taking my guests hostage or something. I get to know the rooms in my being. And in some way, I think that makes us less afraid of what we encounter out in the world. The last interesting thing about this person I met is that to the extent that her home is elsewhere, it's also the sense that everything that's against her in the world and everything that might be able to help her is also outside of her. It's in guides and entities and downloads and intuitions. And you see, like, oh, everything is somehow, when everything feels out there, I either have to protect myself from it, which gets quite stressful, or I have to somehow protect it from me. And so this sense of, I don't know, walling things off or making things other, it's tough on us, I think. And when we have the doors open, things can flow. This is just a little something by, a little poem by Ikkyu. He says, as Ikkyu does not think of his body as if it were his body, he lives in the same place, whether it is town or country. It's like wherever I'm taking up residence, I'm here. Whatever might be here, I can be with, because here does include that great silence at the beginning. It has a spaciousness, it has a generosity when I can lean on it and not create borders. So, yeah, there's a great koan in our miscellaneous I think we'll sit with this afternoon. It just says, taking the form of Guan Yin, find shelter for the homeless person. Taking the form of Guan Yin, who's the Bodhisattva of great mercy who hears all the cries of the world. Find shelter for the homeless person. And give us some bells. Just notice how when you're really here, you don't need to be anywhere else. There's room in this house of being for everything. Taking the form of Guan Yin, the Bodhisattva of great mercy. Find shelter for the homeless person. There's no other place but here.
Taking the form of Kuan Yin, find shelter for the homeless. We were sitting with that koan. I got an image of something like a bus stop. It wasn't very big, and it was clear glass, but there was a little overhang, just a little bit of shelter. And then I thought of images of times when I've felt homeless came to my mind. And I thought of when I was young. in high school, and my parents were in turmoil and fleeing here and there. And I wanted to stay with something I knew, and I wanted to stay in the town I lived in, but I didn't have a place that I could be. And so I asked everybody I knew, like, could I stay with you? You know, could I stay at your house? Do you know any place I could stay? I lived in this kind of conservative small town. Um, nobody lived in other people's houses, whatever. It's kind of a crazy idea. I kept asking, and I almost ended up in this one place where an older woman had a room that was like a walk-through room, and I could have maybe been in that room. And I felt, luckily for me, that didn't happen. One day I asked a girl at the bus stop, and she said, well, maybe you could stay with us. You could stay at my house. And a long story short, I did end up staying at this person's house for a couple years, in her brother's room, most of the time, except when he came home, and then I went in the basement. And his room had wallpaper of tigers. It had like all his books in it. He was just off at college, you know. And that sense, I just felt that sense of like going around and asking, kind of like, are you my mother? Are you my home? When I was in college, I one day took mushrooms with somebody. I was convinced to do this, and it seemed an unwise move. Once we did this, and I was not that experienced with it, I realized this was not the person I should be with, and this was not the place I should be. And they were good enough to let me leave them. And then what I did is I wandered all over town, knocking on the doors of everybody I knew, thinking if I could just find a friend to like hang with me till this is over. And no one was home. And in my mind and in my memory, I knocked on door after door after door, and nobody was home. And so when you were sitting with the koan, perhaps some images came to you, or maybe some thoughts, maybe some feelings about what is it like to be homeless, and what is it like to be at home. And maybe you thought, those things didn't occur to you at all, and you were thinking about the football game coming up after the program. And maybe you had an idea about, you know, what you were thinking or feeling. All of those things are for you. You can't really have the wrong images come to you. You know, when you're listening to a talk and you notice that sometimes you're really paying attention, or like Tess will say something like, I really like the story of the young girl who led guided meditations for her mother and how she did that. And I was like, wow, that really jumped out at me. And I think there were other times maybe I wasn't hearing so much, and that's what happens. And that's it. Like that's your real life. And one of the things, so on the subject of home, you might know, I just bought a house, and it's the first house I've ever bought, and it's absolutely, what I want to say, I guess, is that in connection with it, I've been thinking about how much life I would have liked to have a home earlier. You know, I'm doing this with my partner who's even older than me, and I'm not young, and it's really difficult. It's really hard, and we really would have thought that a good idea would have been to do this a lot earlier. And we tried, actually, especially him. But it just didn't happen. And then all of a sudden now we have a home. And yesterday, so we both have full-time jobs, and so we bought this little place that we could afford, and we love the land, and it's really beautiful, and we basically are like tearing it apart and trying to rebuild it in our spare time, of which we don't have a whole lot. And yesterday, actually the day before yesterday, so yesterday we were going to go up to the house and we had these things we needed to do. And one of those things was we have ordered a special pickup of large bulky items on Monday. And so we were going to move this old mattress and box spring and chair and couch to the road. And we had to say specifically like what the items were and, get them out there Saturday for pickup tomorrow. So Friday, I get a call from a friend who's just calling to say hello. And then they say, oh, if you ever need to borrow my truck, you could do that and that'd be fine. And I go, oh yeah? How about tomorrow? And so anyway, this nice friend actually lent us their truck yesterday, and we used it to take some things to the dump and also to do this task of moving these really heavy items to the front street. And all the time I was doing, I was thinking, what did we think? What did we think we were going to do without this truck? There was no way. We have a little SUV, would never fit any of these items in it. And we're not stupid. Like, we usually plan ahead and think and yet in this instance, we had this plan that these things had to get to the road and no mechanism by which it was going to happen. And in this particular case, something appeared and it was this truck. And that doesn't mean that the truck had to appear. Like, maybe the truck might not have appeared and then something else would have happened. But so there was another thing about the experience of borrowing the truck. So I was really appreciative of this truck. And so we got the truck. The truck, of course, was like full of gas. The meter was absolutely at full. It was a kind thing that someone would do, lend you a truck. And it was great. It was perfect. It was wonderful. And it was time to return it. And all my programming about sort of how do you show gratitude and how do you find yourself in community was like, well, the first thing, we should definitely fill up the truck with gas, so that will, not like the person needs this money, but just as a way of doing what I'm supposed to do. But then I didn't end up doing that because it would have made us late, and it was like, whatever. So then we arrive to return the truck, and we pull in, and we hear this crunch. And there had been these, we drove right over these drainage pipe things that were running across their driveway, and it was dark, and they had this beautiful house, and we were kind of admiring the house, and we destroyed this thing that was there, right? So we're doing well here. So then, what else did we do? I guess we were driving home, and then we realized, we hadn't reorganized something for them that we were supposed to do. And then I started thinking, well, gosh, they were so nice, and maybe I wasn't very thoughtful in my conversation that I had with them. And I was trying to fix it with my friend. I started sending texts like, I'm so sorry, and thank you so much, and all of this stuff, and none of that was helping. And what I wanted to say about this is, so this was an example of that trying to manage how things went, manage my place and my relationships and stuff. And I'm getting a little bit lost in what I'm trying to say here. It's like what's underneath it. What I'm trying to say is that everything is happening underneath, despite all of what we think are our efforts. And our efforts aren't useless or meaningless. They're like a key way in which everything is happening. But what gets in the way and causes suffering and causes sort of less fluidity is the ideas about whether we're doing it right and whether this is the way it's supposed to go, and the idea that we should have it figured out and know how to make our friends like us and know how to get a house at the right time and know how to be accepted and know how to be a good Zen student and know how to give a talk and know all of these things. And while they're all sort of things we can learn about and maybe do a little bit better in a certain way and on a certain level, it's like deep underneath, and this is the silence before, the silence, the great silence. It's not about that. The thing that really holds you and really keeps you at home is not about how it turns out, how you're doing, whether you're doing it right or wrong. It's just simply not about that. And I was recently in a conversation and somebody was talking about that, you often will hear somebody say in a Dharma talk, this moment is enough. What's happening is enough. Whatever you have here is enough. And this morning I got into my car and the thought came to me, and whatever you have is also not enough. And sometimes when you think about that the opposite is already true, instead of that, that's not a problem. It's like it's freeing because you realize, yeah, in a certain way, it's not enough and never will be enough. And so why keep trying in that small little way? It's like, what is enough? Enough in what? Enough. And it just is. And if you're not trying to make it enough or not enough, then you have a better chance of seeing what it is. And what has life got in store for you despite all of your plans and all of the things that you think it should be doing? You are part of it. Everything about life is coming through you. So it's like it's not maybe like practice what might be sort of your responsibility is to pay attention and notice, but it's not to make it turn out a certain way, It's like to see, well, what wants to come through? And what is actually here outside of my opinions about it? But like the less even with my house, I'm afraid of things going well. And I kind of like this house. And I'm really hoping that I'm going to get to move in and we're going to live there and be really happy. And then there's a part of me that very bringing up that image makes me afraid something bad will happen. And I have to keep reminding myself, well, I have it right now. Like what I have right now, this is good. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and it's enough. I was looking at my computer, and I found this thing. I think John Tarrant wrote a long time ago, and read at the opening of an integrative medicine building like 15 years ago. And I'm going to share it with you. It was called Healing is Like Kissing. And because they were doctors and they were healing. And I read it and I thought, well, that could also be, you just substitute life for healing in this poem. And so I'm going to read it. I'm going to say life. Take your pick, which word you hear. Life is like kissing. It can be done mechanically on the way to somewhere you think is more interesting. But it's best done for its own sake. like breathing, like looking at the person in front of you, as if they were the only one in the world, which at this moment they are. Life, you might think, is a whir of beautiful machines, and that's fine. But for me, it means I stop and don't rush about so much. Life is a question, too. Something like, granting the difficulty of this world, what do I really want? And the answer turns out to be everything. The running boy, the owl calling at midnight, the white, perfumed narcissus pushing up through snow, the afternoon blue, and then a thin, translucent yellow. This evening, this morning, that we have together. I want what's happening now. What I want is for the world to kiss me back. And with that, I turn it over to Allison.
The great silence at the beginning, when the four of us were talking about what we were going to do today, and we were the idea of home and homecoming being, in a way, the destination of your practice, even if you didn't know that would be the destination. And I've heard Kensho described in that way, Kensho being the great homecoming, how we're no longer exiling ourselves from our life. And in every direction we look, if we look into our past, it no longer is seen as the wrong history, or in the moment I'm in, or into the future I might be imagining. Originally, our original nature is at home. We don't, I think that maybe is the discovery of our practice, is that we think we need to try to get into my true life. And through the practice, we realize that I was always at home. Originally, I was always at home. My original nature is being at home. And all the ways I now see in which I exiled myself. And our practice is a continual discovery of my own coming and going, passing back and forth between home and exile. I remember, I think it was a few months ago, and I believe it was Tess who asked me this question. And I moved to, I left Santa Barbara about, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago or so, 4.5 years. And part of my psyche I left is still there in some way. And I dream about the mountains of Santa Barbara on fire, or I dream about, I even dreamed last night about some great disaster happening, and I'm halfway to Northern California. So I think we're always working this question out. And she asked me once, Tess, well, is there a place, did you ever have a place where you felt at home? And so I sifted through all the homes I'd lived in, many, many homes. And I thought, not there, not the Palisades, not Holmby Hills, not Santa Cruz, not on the Mesa, not where I am. And then I found this one place, which was utterly surprising to me, where I had felt at home. And this was whenever I was in a campsite in the High Sierra, I felt utterly at home. And I think what that was and what that is that nothing in my mind was finding fault. Nothing in my mind was exiling itself from where I was. So I think that's a beautiful aspect of our practice, is to hold it that way of how am I making this moment the wrong place for me to reside. I was also thinking about Jessie and Hawaii and Michelle. Right before we got on, Michelle was saying, "Oh, now Jessie, you're in Hawaii, so you're really far away now. When you were in Washington, you were a lot closer." And I realized suddenly, I thought when Jesse is moving to Hawaii, that now he's much closer than he was than in Washington. And that's because when I was in first grade, we lived in Hawaii for a year. So Hawaii, some part of me is always at home in Hawaii. And now Jesse lives in the neighborhood. And one more short thing before we sit a little bit. Jesse was talking about how there's this feeling of that's very strong in the island culture, where you're either an insider or you're an outsider. You're a haole or you're a local. And it's always a prized thing to be, recognized as a local. And I remember that from so many times going back to the islands through my life. And I was there in Hawaii just before the pandemic, just about a month before everything got locked down. I was there with my brother, one of my brothers, and my sister and their spouses. And we went to a farmer's market, a local farmer's market, where they were selling honey and local coffee and bouquets of flowers. And I'm at one of the little booths, and some guy who's clearly a local, he comes up to me and he says, "Are you a local?" He said, "You walk like a local man. I can tell you're a local." And some part of me was so suddenly flattered. It's like I'd gotten the golden ticket. I was in. I was a local, and it was evident by the way I walked. And I thought, the temptation of the ranking, whether I'm inside or outside, that as soon as I say, it doesn't matter whether you place yourself outside or inside, either I'm exiled and I'm not a local, or I'm a local and I've exiled everyone else. So a part of my life will be in exile, in that ranking of in or out. And before I was recognized as a local, I was just here.
John Joseph, I see you're on. You have anything you'd like to say?
Said I don't think I can really add anything else, but I just love this the great silence and home, and my original home, and yeah, thanks.
What does that home feel like to you? Can you tell us?
Sorry?
I said, what does that home feel like to you? Will you tell us?
Yeah, it feels familiar and intimate and warm. It feels right, like it's always been right, you know. Um, yeah, it's not one thing out of place. One thing you said, Tess, that was sort of a trigger for me. Always when I hear the words, I didn't get it, um, I always have this recollection of a friend who years ago when we all lived together in a it's kind of a spiritual commune when I was going to college, and lots of spiritual paths flowing through, and one was Eureka, and I guess which is kind of like an S-like program. I don't know. She came home and she said, and I was the only one who didn't get it. And she burst into these incredible tears and just these warm tears streaming down her face. She was so sad, and that memory for me is just so tender and sad and sweet. You know, this not getting it.
Yeah, I think I was reminded as we were sitting that there's a word in Hawaiian. There's the word for someone who's of native Hawaiian lineage is kanaka, but there's also someone, a resident of Hawaii, is kama'aina, which means child of the land. It's kind of a beautiful thing. You don't have to be in Hawaii to be kama'aina. You could be Denver, kama'aina. You could be Santa Cruz, kama'aina. You could be, it's kind of a beautiful thing. We're the child of wherever we find ourselves. So that's a nice thing. I thank you for giving me that. I am kama'aina.
Sort of like Kama'aina of the original silence. We're all children of that. Thank you, Jesse, Amaryllis, and Todd. You shower us with your music.
I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way.
Thank you, Amaryllis and Todd. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.